A small group of travelers moves cautiously through the Austrian countryside. The leader wears the clothes of a pilgrim, attempting to blend in with the local population. But there's something about him that doesn't quite fit. This isn't an ordinary pilgrim. This is Richard I of England, Richard the Lionheart, the legendary warrior king, hero of the Third Crusade, now trying desperately to cross enemy territory undetected. The group stops at a small inn in the village of Erdberg. Richard tries not to blow his disguise, but the innkeeper grows suspicious because of Richard's expensive ring despite his poor disguise, and attempts to pay with an uncommon gold coin. The behavior of his companions also does not align with that of humble pilgrims. One of his companions gets recognized as part of the English royal entourage. Their cover has been blown. Word spreads quickly through the village. By nightfall, officers loyal to Duke Leopold V of Austria surround the building. The king is discovered, captured, and bound. The world's most powerful Christian monarch is now a prisoner, far from home, with no army to protect him. What follows will become medieval history's most famous kidnapping and the largest ransom demand of the medieval world. A financial crisis that will drain England's coffers and change the course of European history. December 21st, 1192. Richard I of England, the warrior king known as Lionheart, is captured near Vienna while attempting to return from the Third Crusade. He's been identified despite his disguise and is now in the hands of Duke Leopold V of Austria, a man with a personal vendetta against him. For weeks, Richard's whereabouts are unknown. His mother, Eleanor of Aquitaine, begins a frantic search while his brother John quietly celebrates, seeing an opportunity to seize power. This is no ordinary hostage situation. This is the most valuable prisoner in Christendom. And Duke Leopold knows exactly what he has. Soon, he will transfer Richard to the custody of someone even more powerful, Holy Roman Emperor Henry VI. And together, they will demand a king's ransom in the most literal sense. They want 150,000 marks, approximately 100,000 pounds of silver, an almost impossible sum that represents 2 to 3 years of England's entire national income. The stage is set for a diplomatic crisis unlike any other. A crusader king imprisoned against all laws of Christendom. A ransom demand so extraordinary that meeting it will require unprecedented taxation of clergy and commoners alike. Richard I had ascended to the English throne in July 1189, following the death of his father, Henry II. Almost immediately, he began preparations for the Third Crusade, determined to recapture Jerusalem from the Muslim leader Saladin. Richard was a warrior king in the truest sense. Tall, strong, skilled in combat, he lived for battle and glory. He spent just 6 months of his 10-year reign in England, viewing the country primarily as a source of revenue for his military campaigns. His heart belonged to his ancestral lands in France and to the Crusader cause in the Holy Land. In April 1191, Richard departed Sicily for Acre with an army of approximately 17,000 men. But before reaching the Holy Land, fate intervened. A storm scattered his fleet, and several ships, including one carrying his sister Joan and his fiancée Berengaria of Navarre, washed up on the shores of Cyprus. The island's ruler, Isaac Komnenos, took the survivors prisoner and seized their belongings. Richard's response was swift and decisive. On May 1st, 1191, his fleet arrived at the port of Lemessos on Cyprus. When Isaac refused to release the prisoners and return their property, Richard unleashed his army. Within a month, the entire island was conquered. Richard had Isaac bound in silver chains, a humiliation carefully calculated to keep Richard's promise not to put him in iron chains. The conquest of Cyprus proved strategically crucial, providing the Crusaders with a vital base in the eastern Mediterranean. It also added significantly to Richard's reputation and his treasury. But this was merely a prelude to his crusading exploits. In the Holy Land, Richard's military genius shone. He defeated Saladin's forces at the Battle of Arsuf in September 1191. a victory that boosted Crusader morale while causing shame among the Muslim ranks. Richard refortified key coastal cities and twice led his army to within sight of Jerusalem. But internal divisions among the Crusader leadership prevented a successful siege of the Holy City. It was during these campaigns that Richard planted the seeds of his own capture. At the Siege of Acre, Leopold V of Austria had placed his banner alongside those of Richard and Philip II of France, claiming equal status. Richard, enraged by this presumption, tore down Leopold's standard and cast it into the moat. This public humiliation would not be forgotten. Richard's campaigns in the Holy Land also generated other enemies. When Conrad of Montferrat was murdered by assassins in April 1192, many suspected Richard's involvement, though this was never proven. Leopold of Austria happened to be Conrad's cousin, adding personal vengeance to his motivations. By autumn 1192, Richard had secured a 3-year truce with Saladin. The Crusaders would retain control of the coastal cities, and Christian pilgrims would have access to Jerusalem. It wasn't the total victory Richard had hoped for, but it was the best he could achieve under the circumstances. With his army exhausted and political troubles brewing back home, Richard set sail for Europe in October 1192. But fate again intervened. Storms forced Richard's ship to land in northern Italy. He now faced a dangerous journey across hostile territory. To the south lay lands controlled by Emperor Henry VI, who was allied with Richard's enemies. To the north was the territory of the German princes, many of whom were loyal to Leopold of Austria. Richard attempted to travel incognito, disguising himself as a pilgrim, taking only a small retinue. But a king like Richard, physically imposing, accustomed to command, speaking only French and Latin, could not easily pass unnoticed. His party traveled through Austria in December 1192, trying to avoid detection. It was in the village of Erdberg, near Vienna, that Richard's journey came to an abrupt end. On December 21st, 1192, officers of Duke Leopold V identified and captured the disguised king. Richard the Lionheart, King of England, was now a prisoner. Duke Leopold knew that in capturing Richard, he held not just a king, but a gold mine. Yet the detention presented problems. As a returning crusader, Richard should have been protected under the laws of Christendom. Pope Celestine III was furious at Leopold's actions and promptly excommunicated him, the medieval equivalent of a diplomatic nuclear option. Leopold held Richard at Dürnstein Castle, a fortress perched high above the Danube. Some romanticized accounts tell of Richard composing poetry in his captivity. There's also the famous legend of Richard's loyal minstrel, Blondel, traveling from castle to castle across Europe searching for his king. As the story goes, Blondel would sing the first verse of a song he and Richard had composed together, hoping to hear the king respond with the second verse. At Dürnstein, the legend claims, Blondel finally heard his king's voice answering from within. It's a romantic tale that captures the imagination, though historical records confirm it's merely that, a tale. Richard's location was never truly secret, as negotiations for his release began almost immediately. The turning point came at Easter, 1193, when Leopold transferred Richard to the custody of Emperor Henry VI at Speyer. This elevated the crisis to a new level. Henry was not only more powerful than Leopold, but also harbored his own grievances against Richard. Henry had claims to Sicily, which Richard's family contested, and he was allied with the French king Philip, Richard's arch-rival. Henry saw in Richard's capture an unprecedented opportunity. He demanded an enormous ransom, 150,000 marks of silver, approximately 35,000 kilograms of precious metal. This sum represented 2 to 3 times England's entire annual income, an almost impossible amount that would require extraordinary measures to raise. His mother, Eleanor of Aquitaine, immediately took charge, acting as regent in her son's absence. She faced dual challenges, raising the unprecedented sum while preventing Richard's brother John from seizing power. The ransom demand of 150,000 marks represented one of the largest financial transactions of the Middle Ages. Meeting this demand would require squeezing every possible source of revenue. The collection proceeded slowly over months, creating hardship across England. By early 1194, Eleanor of Aquitaine had managed to raise approximately 100,000 marks, 2/3 of the demanded ransom. This extraordinary achievement reflected both her political skill and the desperation of England to recover its king. The money was transported across the Channel under heavy guard, an enormous logistical operation carrying wealth that would be worth hundreds of millions in today's currency. Emperor Henry, recognizing that extracting the full amount might prove impossible, agreed to release Richard upon receipt of the 100,000 marks, with guarantees for the remaining sum. On February 4th, 1194, in the city of Mainz, Richard the Lionheart was finally freed after more than a year in captivity. To ensure payment of the outstanding ransom, 67 high-born hostages were handed over to Henry. These were sons of noble English families who would remain in imperial custody until the debt was settled. For the remainder of his reign, Richard focused on military campaigns in France, rebuilding castles, and securing his continental possessions. Richard never returned to the Holy Land, despite frequently expressing his desire to launch another crusade. Instead, he spent his final years fighting to reclaim and secure his territories in France. On March 25, 1199, Richard was struck in the shoulder by a crossbow bolt. The wound turned gangrenous, and Richard died on April 6, 1199, at age 41. In his final moments, Richard reportedly pardoned the crossbowman who had shot him, providing him with 100 shillings, though some accounts claim the man was later flayed alive despite this pardon. Richard's heart was buried at Rouen, and his body at Fontevraud Abbey near his father. Ultimately, Richard the Lionheart's kidnapping and ransom became a defining moment of medieval history, one that drained England's wealth, shifted European power, challenged royal immunity, and inspired lasting legends. Though Richard returned briefly to his kingdom, the cost of his freedom echoed long after, shaping the fate of empires and the very idea of monarchy itself.